so many thanks to so many different people. Thank you to all of y'all for being here today and sticking around to this last one. It is an endurance sport, I think, to go to a day like this. And thank you to Stony and Lizzie and Carrie and Alicia with Open Air. It's just been the most incredibly supportive and generous experience. And Christine and Ilona at the Chateau, and Mike and Shannon supporting me at Hungry Hill. It's been a dream. I've really loved my time here in Butte, and I am woefully counting down my last week here. So this is a nice grounding as we go into that. And some of you may have caught some of my earlier presentations this month. We all did one at the Brown Bag event at the Archives, and I did another talk with members at Hungry Hill, where I've been in residence. And so there are some thematic overlaps between those talks and this one. So if you did happen to catch those previous, feel free to zone out, shoot the repetition for you. There are some shared slides. I don't have all that much to cover. But for those of you who maybe didn't see those earlier presentations gave a bit more of a broader overview of my history working in ceramics and my creative process, and in particular, my practices as a ceramicist that mostly wood fires. And so if you have any curiosities about those topics, which will not really be covered as much today, feel free to find me, and we can chat about that at another time. But for the purposes of this presentation, when I thought about what elements of my studio practice are coming to the forefront during my time here in Butte, in conversation with the communities and the landscapes and the narratives that I've been so grateful to get to interface with here, I've decided to share with you today some musings on a really specific thematic through line in my work, which is the practice of extraction of materials by way of physical digging and carving. And I'm going to give a short presentation and a quick demo of a form that shows up time and time again in my body of work utilizing these methods. And finally, invite y'all, should you choose to accept, to dig your hands and tools into some clay, should you be itching to as well at the end. So, this first image is of a dried clay deposit that I have dug from in northern New Mexico, where I live. This one is a bit further from my home and studio. It's in northwestern corner of the state near the Bisti Badlands, if you've ever heard of them. I work often with natural materials, sourcing wild clay that I dig, process, and I make into clay bodies and also slips for use in my studio. And so already the act of digging is being named as central to all of my production. Before even approaching it from a conceptual framework, it provides a means of sourcing material from which all else stems. The muscle memory that resides in my body of a crouched position, hand extended into earth, sensually exploring and extracting material with repetitive contemplative movements, resurfaces in the embodiments enacted later on as I sculpt in the studio. The photographs on the left side of the screen are of some other recent digging sites that I've explored this summer in New Mexico. More often than not, I am retrieving material from a pre-existing road cut, like the image in this bottom left corner, where clay is already exposed and my intervention will not interrupt the structural integrity of a landscape. In a field such as ceramics that relies by definition on the process of removing natural materials from their environments, I think it's important to consider the where, why, and how that extraction is completed. The photographs on the right, the bowls and the cups, are examples of how those wild materials vitrify into my final ceramic products. The bowl stack on the top are made from completely raw wild clay. There's no slip or glaze used in conjunction with the material. So all of that surface variation, all of those different colors, are a result of the mineral content in the clay vein that I've dug that interacts with the high fire process of wood firing. And the cups underneath have been dipped in a slip, which is a liquid state of clay, made from a very iron-rich deposit of clay. So all of those dark, moody flashes on the surface are the result of that high iron content of the slip, particularly in conversation with down firing, which is a particular aspect of my wood firing process. And again, if you'd like to get a little more technical and nerdy about all of that, come find me after and I can chat your ear off about some specific temperatures and such. So that literal example of digging brings us now to a current body of work that I've been working with for the past year or so. It has roots in another residency that Lizzie mentioned that I was so lucky to receive through the Arquetopia Foundation last year. I was in Puebla, Mexico in the fall, and while I was there, I found myself looking upwards just as much as I was crouched down to dig through some volcanic clay that's native to the area there. And I was particularly taken with the architectural trend in the city of buildings such as these that had topical layers of construction eroding to reveal previous building materials underneath. So of archways and passageways and articulated viewpoints through which to see buildings, gathering spaces, and dwellings of the past. I started making vessels, such as the one pictured on the right, that are unexpectedly utilitarian, such as the buildings that were around me. So they all have these excised centers, negative space that's cut out from the bellies of the pots that would seemingly nullify any attempt at utility, but I built hidden interior chambers that allow for water to be held around that negative space. So the vessels provide both a utilitarian offering as well as a framed viewpoint through which to examine the environment, either built or natural, that was already existing around you. So that piece is sort of at an angle there, but that cut goes all the way through. So you're both able to see all the way onto the other side of the pot and also use it as a vessel of carrying liquid, should you so choose. So when I returned to New Mexico, I started seeing parallels in the built environments around me there too. So these photographs are of the Nogales Cliff House, which are Puebla ruins close to where I live, that are dated to have been built between the years of 1000 and 1300. I hiked them this summer, and the vessel on the right is another piece from the same body of work, which I was calling, an extraction series. And I made that piece this summer as well for an exhibition in New Mexico. And you can see the visual through line, I think, between the negative space I constructed as central to my vessel, as well as those constructed in the cliff dwellings as domestic and community-centered sites. So I'm interested in this idea of carved out cavities and of dug out negative space as providing refuge, safety, and community. So as I've continued along this body of work, I found more and more examples reflective of this in the hollowed out landscapes that I continue to exist amongst. So the photographs here on the right are of acequias, which are vital communal irrigation ditch systems. They're also collectively owned autonomous self-governing systems that crisscross the inhabited environments of northern New Mexico. And these ditches, which originated as an irrigation system in antiquity in the Middle East, were introduced to what is now referred to as New Mexico by the colonial Spanish in the 16th century. They carry water to the fields that belong to the families that live alongside each individual acequia's waterways. I don't personally live on a property that has any water rights to an acequia, but as someone who's lived in Taos for the past 5 years, I certainly benefit from the environmental and agricultural results of them, as well as the community building that they provide. So every spring, the lumpias occur, which is an annual community cleaning of each irrigation ditch enacted by each acequia's presidentes. And I'm able to volunteer my time and energy to these maintenance days, which allow, as the photograph on the right shows, for the eventual releasing of water in the springtime. And the images of my work on the left, which is another set of vessel sculptures, but actually predate the extraction series is kind of coming to fruition in my mind. I think they're representative of how canalways and extracted pieces of soil have long been on my mind as a form of both community sharing and offerings. So then I started thinking about what digging means and has always meant. What does it mean to individuals and communities alike? And to dig can be, like I said, a means of irrigation and of planting. These photos are usually much more high quality. So imagine you've got glasses that you just put on and maybe get a little better. To dig can provide the methods of cooking a shared meal. To dig amongst animals can be a means of behavioral expression, creating a shelter from prey, protecting personal items, or hunting for food. To dig a burial site can be a ritual, a communal and familial expression of reverence. And as the community of Butte Wells knows, to dig can be a means of mining minerals, metals, and materials. To engage in vertical extraction in this way opens up questions of commerce, labor, and environmental fragility. Our tools of digging can be soft and sensate, bodily in nature. Our tools of digging can also be man-made, sharp and spanning early and industrial periods of human production. When I arrived in Butte, I knew I wanted to continue my work in this extraction series and to continue to experiment between both additive and subtractive methods of creating negative space, cavities, mines, as it were, for thought, offering communal sensorial experiences. And I've previously constructed all of the vessels in the extraction series by means of coil building because I always believed it to add this sense of breadth into the figures, to leave them more full-bodied in their first iteration, and then to refine and carve them down to a more planar distribution of weight. I was afraid of slab building for its potential to slump and to leave me with a more sort of less lifelike vessel. But I started experimenting while I was here with tar paper, which also calls into my process another resource utilized as a result of extractive production as a constructive support. So I've been creating templates with these calculated angles and seams to create the same hidden walls, chambers, and empty spaces. I started experimenting with the idea that negative space in that cavity always being possible, but relying on the tactile intervention of a viewer's hand to bring it into function. So these are hollow block forms that fit together to form a monolithic shape, but when pushed apart, retain a self-supporting weighted structure that allow for this constructed, carved out vantage point. I've been utilizing references to architecture, modernist planes, and harshly imposed angles as a reference to the implicit interference of a human hand at play in the act of digging. Did that video go?
Yeah.
I've been continuing my process of subtractive carving methods of ceramic digging too. I continue my practice of methodically, rhythmically, repetitively, almost ritualistically, digging into hard blocks of clay to create vessels of utility. The parallels of doing this just down the street from an active open pit mine site is not lost on me. I aim in these decisive quick cuts into clay to emulate the original states of the material I am utilizing. In fire and ceramic material, we are able to pause an eventual state of earth and decay, transitioning it from moldable to vitrified earth. By referencing organic states of matter in my clay forms, I tease the implicit relationship between human and geologic time. And so that brings me to the demo that I'd like to give for y'all today. So these are my salt cellars, or what I call them. They're a form that I make all the time. I started making them about 4 years ago, and they are carved out from a solid block of clay. And they do have this utilitarian purpose. You know, they're food safe, they're able to be kept next to your stove, you can pick up a little pinch of salt, you can keep them next to your bed with rings in them. I have friends that use them as ashtrays. They're versatile, but they also have another utility in my own studio practice in that when I do dig wild clay and particularly make slips from them, I will dip each of these salt cellars into various increasing percentages of inclusion of that wild clay. So it's part of this larger project I've been making for a long time where I'm sort of like mapping what the earth looks like that I'm able to utilize around my home and studio in varying percentages and saturated colors. And so as you can see, they come out in a variety of colors and materials. All of those different variations of color are a result of the different wild clays that I'm working with, and then the wood firing process. So I thought I would give a short demo to y'all today of how I make those pieces. I do get asked when I sell them maybe awkward. I've never made a piece in front of this many people before, but you'll bear with me, I'm sure. So I start with an entire block of clay that I prepare the day before. Can you all see?
Y'all can gather around.
So this is my most favorite banding wheel. And like I said, I start with a solid block of clay. I found that 2 pounds works well for this form. So the day before, I wedge out any air and I prepare it into this square form. I'm not so interested in complete uniformity, so it's often slightly organic, but as long as it has this sort of like relatively stable top plane and it's emulative of a square. And so I start in that way, like I was describing, of wanting my pieces to eventually, in their finished product, look like what they used to look like in the earth. So I start by adding texture to the top plane of the piece. So I have a serrated rib that, and I'll try to narrate all of this, but the way that I've conceived of this form is really about moving quickly and just seeing where the cuts take me. So I'll start by sort of scratching a bit of surface with the serrated rib and then digging a little deeper in with, this is probably my favorite tool in my toolbox. It's a really heavy, like strong, small metal rib that I can get into little corners. And so I'll make it a bit more carved out with this. And then I use that same tool to clean up each edge of that top plane.
Also focused.
And then I take something that, usually I have a cap to a bottle that I use at home, but I forgot to bring it with me. So I found this in the Hungry Hill studio, but I'll find something circular that sort of fits this same function, and I'll make sure it's well centered on there. And then the great thing about banding wheels is you can just spin it around. And then I have that traced circle on the top. And then I take my circular extraction tool, and I have a couple different layers I have to get through of this. I will say that this is a little bit softer of a state than I like to work with. I like it to be a little bit tougher so that I'm really having to sort of like push against the clay. So we'll see how this goes. But I do a first go just trying to follow the line of that full circle as close as I can on the surface. And I'll often grab the clay, so my apologies if that gets in the way of your line of view. But it takes me a couple goes around. And I'm not caring too much about the depth that I go because I'll go back in. So next, after I have that first circle, like I said, I'm thinking about depth. And so I know that this piece responds well to having a pretty deep cavity. So I'll usually do another one that's another go around in the circle that's just trying to get me deeper. And again, I've kind of learned that the best way to be is just quick about it. Try not to linger. And then I'll just sort of go through with smaller carves to try to get it so that it's an open form. There's not too many ridges getting in the way. Sometimes I'll expand the opening out a bit more. So I'm kind of existing in this go around in that in-between height. Sometimes, because this clay is a bit softer, I was able to get down quite easily, but often I won't be able to, so I'll then do a layer of cuts that are going down vertically. And then I'll smooth out the interior. So this is a really flexible rib. And I'll start by smoothing out the top of that so that any of that moment in clay where the excision meets the top kind of gets folded back. It's meant to sort of seem, again, like this sort of like spontaneous excavation moment. And then I'll go through with a couple vertical smudges throughout. And this is just me trying to erase the presence of my hand and tools.
I have a question. Is there ever a time, because I do this in printmaking, where you intentionally leave the evidence of you making a piece?
Definitely. In this particular moment, I'm not, but yes, in many other forms, definitely. Okay, so again, since this clay is a bit softer than I usually work with, it'll have a couple little rip marks inside of it right now, and I can go back in once it's hardened up a bit more and smooth all of that out. And then this is the fun and scary part, which is cutting away the excess clay on the sides. And so what I'm going for here is I'm trying to keep it elevated and vertical on the top plane, but I'm trying to leave it as rough as I can on the bottom side, all while not cutting into the interior cavity and also leaving it so that it's able to stand up. Sometimes I'll cut away too much and it'll tip over, and I'll still fire those just for, you know, my own purposes, but it's not quite as sellable in that way. So I'll start from, I'm always carving from this side towards my body, and so I do 4 along each side, and I'll kind of take a really hardy serial killer grasp to the fettling knife. Again, I'm usually working with clay when it's much more resistant to me, so I'm really having to struggle to get it back towards my body. So that's when I need my wrist strength, if you will. So I'll look kind of at first that I'm placing this in such a way that it's going to leave me enough clay there that it'll stand up eventually, but that it's lining up with this top corner here, and then I'll pull. And often I'll stop before I've fully made it all the way through, and then I can pull that clay, and it'll give me some moments of jagged edges. Again, it's a bit softer now than it should be, but it'll give me that ripped quality.
It seems like there's kind of, you know, Christine asked about like leaving your handedness versus covering up your tracks, and it seems like with these pieces there's kind of a juxtaposition between the two.
Exactly, yeah. And this form has taken on so many different iterations. Like I said, I started making it about 4 years ago, and even though it's the same general product, it's completely different to me. It's kind of indecipherable in its original situation.
Do you need a relatively uniform thickness for the firing?
Like amongst my piece or amongst all pieces? Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb for ceramics. These pieces can be tricky in that way because it's not so evenly distributed, but I dry them upside down very slowly to hope for no cracking. So that's what I'm left with. Again, because the clay is a bit softer than I usually go, it's less jagged on the bottom than usual. There will often be moments of, you get a little hint of it right here, as well as my hair that has gotten in there. But of a smooth edge with then a ripped and jagged corner seam. So usually there's a bit more of that, but this is what I'm going for, to have that elevated quality of clay taken out around the bottom, but enough for it to stand securely on your table. So that's my salt cellar board. And I prepared some smaller blocks of clay and grabbed some tools if you all would like to engage with material in the same way of thinking about cavities as offerings and extraction as perhaps an additive rather than a subtractive process. It's by no means required, it's an invitation because it's been a long day, and also if you would like to just use that as like a slightly more relaxed Q&A time, I'm happy to, but I will put blocks of clay and tools here. And if you're welcome, or if you'd like, you're welcome to grab one. I will say that an advantage to working with clay in this state is that you don't need to add water, so it's cleaner and less harsh on the chateau's environment here. But I will, unless you really feel like you want to take home this unfired clay, I will collect them back afterwards and reclaim them, which is, again, all fitting into this process of returning clay to some sort of earthen state. So, thank you all so much.